Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Hussein. I'm from the geodatabase team. And in this hopefully 20 to 25 minutes, we're going to discuss and talk about attribute rules. So in this session, will be I decided to do like a hands-on session to start from scratch with an empty geodatabase. We're going to create a couple of classes, add attribute rules, and just see how it works, all right? So we're going to experience the attribute rules concept, the constraint and immediate attribute rules, and the user experience of authoring these attribute rules, all right? So what I have here is I have a geodatabase on Postgres. As you can see, it's empty. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a couple of classes. I'm going to create a city class and then a coffee shop class. And then I'm going to add attribute rules to start constraining and ensuring my data integrity in these with these features. So let's go ahead and right-click, new, feature class. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class called city. Should be polygon. And then go next. Obviously, a city gonna have a name. So this is a text field name, very simple stuff. And gonna go ahead and stick with the default and then hit finish. So now I have a feature class called city here, which is a polygon. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add global IDs, because global IDs are a requirement if you're going to work with the attribute rules. So I'm going to go ahead and create a global ID. So what we're going to work here is like essentially in a non-versioned manner. So this is not feature services or anything. This is non-versioned or traditional workspace, right? So now I have a city feature class with a single feature, right? With a single field, which is called name. I'm going to go ahead and create another feature class. Let's call it coffee shop. Obviously, coffee shop is a point feature class. We're not really interested in these. So I'm going to go ahead and click next. And then here is where it gets interesting. So what I'm going to need is a name field. And this will be a manually entered field, right? The user will put the name of the coffee shop. This is your Dark Horse, Blue Bottle, Demitas, whatever the name of the coffee shop. And then once you have that, the other field here is the city name. And this field is a derived field. So we're gonna create a coffee shop in city of Pomona that will be populated with Pomona, essentially, all right? Makes sense? And the final one is I'm going to create a field called unique name, which will be the concatenation of the coffee shop name dash which city, right? Very simple stuff. Let's go ahead and click next and then finish. And just like that, we have two feature classes now. Let's go ahead and add global IDs, obviously. So now we're ready to add them to the map, and then let's play with them. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in to, let's do some symbology first, a little quick. I am going to pick like the dashed symbology for the cities. And then for the coffee shop, let's just pick, let's see, what do we have here? Yeah, that sounds fine. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom into San Diego. Sure, let's pick Coronado Island. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new city, right? So let's call this city of Coronado. Obviously, you can see that I created the city without a name, and I don't want to do that. I want a rule that prevents me from doing that. So that's the first thing we're going to do. So for this, we're going to give this a pass, and then we're going to say Coronado. Right? Just go ahead and create it. And obviously, if you go ahead and created a coffee shop, right, you can create a coffee shop in the city, okay? Obviously, nothing is populated. We don't want that. We want some certain rules that prevent me from doing that. I want rules to prevent me from creating a coffee shop in the middle of the ocean, obviously. So we're going to do all the stuff. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our first rule. A city must have a name. If I want to create a new city or update a city, it must have a name. So let's go ahead and do that. So in order to create an attribute rule, you can right-click on the feature class, go to design, and then you can go to the attribute rules. And now, to prevent an edit from happening based on a certain logic, this is called a constraint rule, which a constraint rule returns true or false based on the evaluation of the script. So let's go ahead and create a constraint rule, add rule, and then let's call this rule city must have a name. Okay, hope you can see. I'm gonna start zooming in here. Let me know if you can see. Looks good. All right, and then the expression is the most important thing here. Then I'm gonna go ahead and click on the expression. This is where I write my arcade script, and the most important thing is what we call the globals. With the arcade, it gives you essentially context-based variables, and the most important one is $sign feature. Okay, $sign feature is the current feature that is being edited, updated, or deleted. Okay, and in this case is what? It's the city feature class. So what I want to do is if the feature dot name is null, go ahead and return false. That means please fail this edit. Don't let this go in. Okay? Otherwise, return true. So let's go ahead and verify. Looks good. I'm gonna go ahead and check that, and then I'm gonna go ahead and add an error number. It's like what error you wanna show if this happens. Like, as you can say, like error city must have an. Okay, and this is the interesting part, the triggers. When do you want to trigger this rule to be executed? Do you want it on insert or on update? Probably both, because if you create a new feature, you want to check that the name is not null. If you update the feature, like someone could erase the name altogether, right? That's an update. Delete? Probably not, right? You're not gonna erase the name and then delete it, so we don't really need it on delete. So let's go ahead and save that. Looks good. Okay. Now let's go ahead and create a fake city without a name, right? Let's say here, Chula Vista. And then we're gonna get an error. And that's a good error. We want to get this error on trigger. And that's the error of on insert. Obviously, the trigger event is insert. It says city must have a name. Okay, how can I fix that? Very simple. Give it a name, Chula Vista. So, and now if I just double click here, the feature is created successfully. Now, I'm gonna go back and go to the coffee shop here, and I am going to create an interesting attribute rule. And this attribute is called calculation attribute rule, right? So what I want to do is an immediate calculation attribute rule, which will pull the city name from the polygon and populate it in the city name field that is in the coffee shop feature class. So let's go ahead and get the city name from the city feature class. So obviously this is more work to do, right? Because I want to assign this calculation rule to the city name, right? That's what I want to update. And then the expression will be, that's the interesting part here, is as following. The first thing we need to do is somehow I am now in the coffee shop feature class, right? I need to get a pointer or a cursor to the city feature class. How can I do that? And I'm glad you asked. We can create a variable called fscity, feature set by name. And that feature set by name is an arcade function. Let's zoom in here so you can see more better. Okay, and it's an arcade function that allows you to open other classes. Okay, and here we're going to introduce a new global, and the global is called $data store. And $data store is a very interesting global that allows you to access the entire workspace. And in this case, it's the geodatabase to the right? This geodatabase is the workspace. So I can access any feature class, right? And read from it right from using this function. What do I want to access? I want to access the class that is called city. And the third parameter is what fields are you interested in? This feature class can have 100 fields, and you really want to only list the fields that you're interested in. And I'm only interested in the name field of the city. Okay. Now that I have the feature set by name, the feature set city, what I'm going to do is I am going to intersects the feature city with the $sign feature, which will give me essentially the intersection. So the $sign feature, the global, is actually the coffee shop that I'm creating or updating. City is the entire feature class. Give me the intersect. That means it will return me an intersect. If is city intersect. Okay. Cool. So now that I got the intersect here, what I'm going to do is I am going to get the first feature of this thing. So since it's a cursor, you could have one or more results. Your coffee shop could intersect more cities, 2 cities, right? So you're interested in the first one. So what you want to do here is you can do an if statement. You have to really, because the city could be null, right? You could have no results. You can create this school in the middle of nowhere, right? And you want to, and here's the interesting part. We can, as a result of this operation, we can fail the edit as part of this immediate calculation rule by returning a dictionary called error message, right? And we can say here, this means that the city, I could not find a city here while I'm creating this feature. So I'm just like city not found, okay? Else, if there's a city feature, then go ahead and return me the name of that city. And then this will be returned. Let's validate. Okay, expression, I'm lucky. Expression is valid from the first time, man. All right, so now this will return the city name, and then this will be stored in the city name field that is in the coffee shop field, okay? And I want to execute this on insert, obviously, and I want to execute this on update. Why? Because someone can move a coffee shop from one city to another city. That is a very realistic workflow, right? And essentially that's it. So let's go ahead and save this. Let's see if we can do that. Let's see what will happen. Now I'm gonna go ahead and create a coffee shop in Coronado. And then if I go to the attributes, you can see that I have populated the field, right? The city name with the city, right? Coronado. If I created Chula Vista, then it populated with this. But how about if I create it in something that there's no city, there's no intersection? We should have gotten an error. Let's do it again. There you go. Get the city name from the feature class. We got an error. That's the error we got, right? And that's the result of returning the error message, okay? That's pretty cool. Let's do the final thing here before we move into questions, guys. And what we want to do is we're going to calculate the unique name, and you can help me with that, right? It could be like really straightforward. That's another way of getting the attribute rules. You can click on the layer, go to the feature layer, and then click on this attribute rule. And then now we're going to do another calculation rule, because it's calculating, it's actually concatenating the name of the city, of the coffee shop plus the city, all right? So let's do that. Let's call this calculate unique name, all right? Where do we want to store this? Obviously in the unique name. And then what does this literally does? It literally does return $sign feature dot name plus, like, I don't know, dash, and then $sign feature dot city name. Is that what you called it? Yeah. And then I want it to execute on insert and on update as well. Okay. Then go ahead and save that. And this is interesting, guys, because I don't know how many of you attended the Tuesday, show of hands, how many of you attended the Tuesday attribute rule session? Like a few of you there. But in general, Sanho talked about the order of attribute rules is very important. Where you execute these attribute rules, how they are executed actually can implicate your results. So obviously we're going to calculate the city before calculating the unique name. Obviously, otherwise you're going to get nulls, right? So let's go ahead and check what we can do here. So I'm going to create a new coffee shop, and this time I'm going to give it a name, right? And the name will be like Dark Horse, right? And then, I don't know if there's a Dark Horse in Chula Vista, but sure. Let's create one. And then if I do that, we can see that the name is something I have put. The city is the city name that we have calculated. And as a result, the unique name is the name plus the city, okay? If the order of these operations flipped, you might get incorrect results. So you need to be able to make sure the attribute rules execute in the correct order that you are anticipating your results in. What else do we want to do? We have like 4 minutes here before we get to questions. So I want to add another rule that checks if your coffee shop doesn't have a name. I want to fail that, okay? So how can I do that? If I do an attribute rule here, and I can create a constraint rule to do that, right? Let's do that. Coffee shop must have a name. And then should be straightforward thing. If $sign feature dot name, right, is equal null, then you want to fail, else go ahead and succeed. And then I'm gonna get another error here, error message. I want to execute this on insert and update. And then save. Sweet. So let's go ahead and create another coffee shop, and this time we get an error, right? So now, as you can see, guys, with your data model, or whatever the data model you have, you can start enforcing these rules and ensure data consistency, data integrity based on these attribute rules, right? And the cool thing about these attribute rules is now you're seeing me adding them to the geodatabase. So what does that mean? It means wherever your geodatabase goes, your rules go with it. That means if you publish your feature class to the feature service, your rules will get executed. Wherever you are in Pro, whether you are in Pro SDK, whether you are running Python, writing like batch jobs in Python, your rules will get executed. Whether you're having a JavaScript application calling apply edit immediately, right, to the feature service, your rules will get executed. And or just calling from any language, calling the REST endpoint directly, your rules will get executed. All right, and eventually what we're gonna do is like we're bringing these attribute rules to the entire platforms like runtime and other collector, which by design will go to the collector and other apps as well in the near future. All right, guys. With that said, I'm gonna open up for questions, and if you have anything you want to see here, any other demos, I am glad to show you guys. Yes. So, very good question. So, how can I export attribute rules? That's the question. How can I export attribute rules? Today, if you have copied a feature class, right, that has attribute rule and pasted to somewhere else, you will not get these attribute rules with in the new feature class. And this is something we're working on, right? So, in order to export attribute rules, you will go to the geo processing and you call a function called export attribute, any second now, attribute rules. And what we're gonna do is like you're gonna select your layer, then you can specify a CSV file, and that will export your attribute rules in a form of CSV where you can turn around and import them into another class with the same schema, obviously. Does that answer the question? Yes. All right. So yeah, export, import, the same thing.
So it doesn't work in an XML document.
So if you export it into an XML document, it will not come with that XML document. That's what I call it. This is something we're going to work on. And go ahead. Very good question. So today with 2.3 and 10.7, attribute rules is only supported on enterprise geodatabases. With 2.4, the next release, we're going to support it with file geodatabase and mobile geodatabases as well. And go ahead, Amar. That's a very good question. So Omar asked, can I touch other features and update other features based on an attribute rules that I currently executed? The answer currently is no, but this is something we're working on in the current release and the next release. What happening here is, like, when you edit, if you have noticed, all the edits, all the changes that you're making is in the same feature that you're currently editing, right? But in the future, what we're going to do is, like, you can create a feature and you can, as a result, create other rows, create other features, delete other features, and do what we call DML operation, data modification language. Thank you, good question. Go ahead. That's a very good question. Can you control the ordering of the attribute rules? Yes, you can. So there are many ways to do this. There's a function called alter attribute rule. Yes, it's alter attribute rules, and in that there is the alter attribute rule order. Is it called order? There is a GB2 called alter order, or maybe I'm mistaken. Alter attribute rule, and in the attribute rules, yeah, you can alter the order of the attribute rules. And another way is you can do it from here as well. You can alter the order. Yes, you can move it up and down, essentially, yes. And that will be how you can alter the order, because the order, as you can say, is very important, right? You want to execute these. And speaking of ordering, we're going to talk about another thing here is, when you execute attribute rules, the order of attribute rules are executed based on the order you specified, but there are something that you cannot control. Like, we always execute all the calculation rules first, and then we execute the constraint rules after that, okay? And that is the same with the on-demand attribute rule execution, which is they call the evaluation. We execute the batch rules calculation first, and then followed by the validation rule. And the reason is because your calculation can result into the feature being in a state that fails the constraint rule. You don't want to execute constraint rule first. You want to execute it last, and that's why we're doing here. Go ahead, all the way back. So, very good question. Excellent question. So, the question was, does the attribute rules execute on the client side or on the server side? The question is, it depends, which is the worst answer you can ever get. All right? But essentially, yes, it depends on how did you configure your rule. And there is an option here called execution, right? And there's an option here called server only, right? So by default, when you create a rule, there are certain type of rule you can say, hey, this rule should only execute on the server, or this rule can execute both on the client and the server. So let's take an example here. And this is currently not a good example because we are the client per se, because I am in a client-server connection, right? If you are in a feature service environment where I published this class into feature service, now there is a server and there is a client. And Pro is smart client that checks. It says, hey, this attribute rule supports client execution, so I'm going to execute it first in the client. And it is pretty cool because if it's a constraint rule, the Pro client checks. It says, okay, I am going to check only in the client, and if it fails, I'm not going to bother the server. I'm not going to send anything to the server, right? I'm going to just fail on the client, especially if a constraint rule is really good, right? So yes, there are rules. You can control what rules can execute on the client, given that the client is actually a smart client that knows how to execute attribute rules on itself. Like runtime today, what you can do with runtime and collector is you can connect to a feature service that has attribute rules, and those attribute rules will get fired, but they will only get fired on the server because the collector has no idea what attribute rules is yet currently, right? But in the future, it will be smarter, and they will try to understand attribute rules, execute on the client for offline uses and all that kind of stuff. Any other questions? Go ahead. I can't hear you. Can you speak up, please?
Any constraint on geodatabase version? Is it 10 or 7 or
Good question. So any constraints on which version of my geodatabase? Yes. So with the geodatabase, starting from, we shipped attribute rules in 2.1, I think, or 2.2. So that is the equivalent version of 10.6.1. So you can create attribute rules in 10.6.1, or you can create it on 10.7. However, the moment you add attribute rules in a geodatabase, you cannot open that class in ArcMap because ArcMap doesn't understand attribute rules. Right? Another question? Go ahead.
So what if someone writes unsafe code in their arcade statement? Like say they didn't do that null check for the city and they tried to access the main property, like what would happen?
That's actually a very good question. So, do I have time? So, what will happen is actually I did this mistake, right? I've did this, and the arcade expression will fail. We'll tell you, hey, by the way, there is no, the city returned null, but you immediately exited. So you will get an error. Sometimes you'll get an error. It really depends on the execution handle. But if within an execution context you get a null, then the arcade script will fail, just like any other arcade script. Like you can fail with many reasons, like divide by 0, right? This is unexpected, right? And these errors are considered real errors, and they will be propagated, and they will fail the edit operation, and they will roll back the edit essentially. So yeah, if you got into a bad, sometimes like you can see an arcade expression and it's perfect, looks good, but there's certain path that can lead you into a bad situation, right? And then based on that, you cannot check all the situations. So you can really have to wait in the execution engine, and then you change your script to make it better. Essentially, you will basically update the script to make it better, do all these null check. But yes, it will catch these cases. The application will not crash or anything. Any more questions? Go ahead. So I am, yes, so this is a very good question. So with 2.3, you cannot edit the expression immediately from attribute rules. You have to delete and add the rule. We're working on fixing that, and there is a reason for that. We prevented to altering the rule because there is a lot of side effect at the back end that we have to deal with as a result of altering the rule. So we thought that's like the easiest way for the first release is just delete the rule and create it again with the same script, right? But in the future, we will, on the next release, actually, we can edit that result. And go ahead. Can you create attribute rules with Arc objects? That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can answer that. But you can do it through Python because you can go through the geoprocessing. I have to check back with you. Check back with me after the session. I'll get you the answer to that. But essentially, you can do it through Python. You can add attribute rules. You can execute rules through the Arc Pro SDK. You cannot change the attribute rules through the SDK though. Python is the main client that can actually change attribute rules. More question? We have 1 more minute. Go ahead. You'll be lucky.
Does the user get any feedback about that some of those fields can be auto-calculated and that they don't need to fill them in?
That's a good question. They currently, so the question is like, does the user get any indication that this field is part of a calculation rule and it will be calculated? The answer is no, but what you can do is kind of dangerous, but some people do it. When you add an attribute rule, I don't know if you have noticed, there is a checkbox here called editable. We can decide like unique name, our unique name that we created, we can make it as uneditable. That's mean, hey user, sorry, you cannot edit this field manually because it's part of an attribute rules. So you have to go through that. So we can make a field as a result uneditable, and but you have to be careful when to change that state, obviously. All right, guys, I think that's all for us. I hope you enjoyed this session, and make sure to take the survey and enjoy the rest of the conference, guys.